You should have on the upper right-hand corner a thing that says present right there.
I tried. There's a thing down here
Okay.
that from the, oh, here it started. Can you see the presentation form?
Yes, ma'am. Yep.
Okay, now I gotta make sure I can see all the, um, I need to, okay, I need to see the chat over here, and I need to see the Q&A. Where are you, Q&A? Oops, over here in this screen. Okay, I'm ready. You want to go to the next slide?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
There we go.
Okay, so let's get the show on the road. So sprouting grains are just a change of feed options for our animals. And so sprouts are essentially the beginning growth of a plant. And this is the first few leaves that emerge from the seed. You can go ahead to the next slide. And a lot of people feed sprouts for a variety of reasons, usually as a supplemental feed. So, just an additional option of feed for our chickens or waterfowl or miscellaneous poultry. We can use it as a treat option, so something to just provide for them just for fun. A lot of our northern folks use it as a foraging option during the winter. And some people do it just for the heck of it. It's just a fun thing to do, and there's really no rhyme or reason behind it. There's, no particular need or timing. It's just a way for us to interact with our birds. So then you might be thinking about what you might look into sprouting. So you can go ahead to the next slide. And so, any of the seeds to sprout could be anything that's untreated for starters. You always want to make sure that your seeds don't have any type of coating or modification to them that could be potentially dangerous to our animals because they will be consuming the seed and the forage itself as a whole. So grass seeds, forage seeds, this could be, cheap Pensacola Bahia grass seeds, could be clovers, anything of that nature that you would see for pasture renovation or anything of that sort. You can also just find stuff in the grocery store like lentils, peas, any type of beans. You do want to make sure that you're not feeding any raw seeds to your chickens, especially beans. Most of our legumes are toxic if they are not actually sprouted or cooked. So make sure you're not just giving them unsprouted seeds. But you can also use sunflowers, pumpkins. A lot of your sunflowers, just make sure that they're not heat treated because then they won't actually sprout. So don't go into the edible sunflower section of the grocery store and expect any of those to sprout because they've been roasted or processed in some way. Most likely, you'll see people recommending small grains. So, to me, I think wheat and rye, sometimes even oats, if you can find whole seeds, are some of the cheapest to purchase. They're usually more commonly found in the winter months because those are all cool season forages where I am in the south. So they only grow in the winter. Depending on where you are in the country, you might be able to find them year round. But really, any seed can be sprouted for your poultry. And the next slide. So there are two ways that you can sprout grains. We will talk a little bit about the jar method and the container method. So the jar method is probably the easiest, the most simple, but results in the least amount of sprouts at a time available for your birds. So this is, ideal for those really small flocks, maybe 3 or 4 birds, or again, just you want minimal input. It's just a fun thing you're doing for your birds. All you need for this is a wide mouth mason jar. They do sell commercial sprouting lids for those wide mouth mason jars, or I will show you a way to make a homemade lid using a shelf liner material. You'll, of course, need the jar ring that goes around that mason jar. You'll need whatever seed that you are looking to sprout, and then you'll need, water straight out of your faucet is perfectly fine. In the container method, you're going to need a container large enough to hold the chosen feeding amount. So, if you have a really large flock, this could be a really large container. I've seen people do this in, plastic kiddie pools, or multi-level kind of sprouting systems. I'll show you some photos in a moment. But really, this is anything that you are, willing to sacrifice to your sprouting journey. And you'll need a strainer and a colander, and a sink or a watering hose or spray nozzle, depending on how large of an amount you're going to sprout, and then of course your seeds. And when you're thinking about a container, make sure that you're looking at something that has a lot of surface area and is not necessarily deep, because you don't want a large thick layer of seeds. You want a thin single layer of seeds. So the more that you're going to do, you want a nice wide bottom container where your seeds can spread out in a single layer and not be packed on top of each other, which could potentially cause issues down the road. Okay, next slide. So the first thing that you'll have to do, no matter what type of system that you set up, is soak your seeds. And so you're going to soak your seeds in water overnight, or at least for 8 hours. And this helps break up that hard coating of the seeds. So typically, if you were to go and plant these seeds, they could take anywhere from 5 to 20 days to germinate, depending on what species that you plant, and what the temperature is and the moisture conditions and all of that in the ground. So we're trying to surpass that by soaking the seeds. It breaks down that hard outer shell and allows the actual plant material to come out and sprout. You only want to soak the amount of seeds that you are going to feed in one sitting to your birds, because these are going to start sprouting, immediately. So you'll even see sprouts starting to come out through that soaking process. And so you don't want to soak, 2 weeks worth, because then they'll be either overgrown or rotten by the time you are ready to feed them. So only soak in increments of whatever you intend to feed. And again, your seeds should fit in one layer on the bottom of your container system. Your jar, you'll see a little bit of stacking in there, but because it is such a small amount and because they grow for such a limited amount of time, that should be fine. So you're only going to do about 1 tablespoon of seeds in your jar system, and then your container is really however much you see fit. I always kind of dry fit my seeds in the bottom of my container to know how many I could fit in there before I ever soak them. So you're going to soak your seeds for 8 hours, and then you're going to move on to the next process. So we can go ahead and change slides. So after soaking your seeds, you're going to drain the water completely by, if you're using that jar method, by just tipping the jar over, making sure, of course, that you have your lid on top of it, either that commercial sprouting lid or the homemade lid that I'll show you. And you're going to remove all of the water from that system. If you are using the container system and you soaked your seeds overnight in some other type of, bowl or bucket or whatnot, I find it easier to use a strainer or a colander. Of course, making sure that the holes for your colander are smaller than the seeds that you're using. I've made that mistake before. And just pouring out all of those seeds into that colander to remove all of the water. You're going to keep your seeds either in that jar if you're using the jar method, or you're then going to distribute your seeds out into your container with a nice, again, thin layer. And you're going to give those seeds a really good rinse with fresh water, and then we're going to drain them out completely again. So you soaked them for 8 hours, you drained that water, you gave them a really good fresh rinse, and now you've drained them completely again. And then you're going to rinse again with fresh water and drain again. And you're going to do this every day, twice a day, until the sprouts reach the desired height. So, growing sprouts, super simple. That's literally all there is to it. All you have to do is soak your seeds for 8 hours and then rinse them and kind of put it away and forget it, except morning and night every day. You're going to drain and rinse your sprouts. It is extremely important to rinse them with really good fresh water and draining them really thoroughly, because stagnant water just leads to mold and slime and gross, and your seeds will become inedible for your chickens. So we want to make sure that we are, providing them with a healthy feed alternative, and not necessarily, giving anything that would be a risk to them, especially if it's moldy or anything of that sort. So you can go ahead to the next slide. So when you are feeding your birds, your sprouts should be less than 4 inches long. This helps prevent crop impaction. Anytime you're feeding fresh forage or green, grass to your birds, it should always be less than 4 inches in length to help prevent crop impaction, because they don't have that chewing mechanism that is going to break up that grass. They're going to swallow that whole, and we want to make sure that those aren't getting tangled up in their crop and causing issues in the future. So that is the difference between sprouts and a fodder system, which many of you might have heard of if you've looked into sprouts. Typically fodder is growing almost like a hydroponic system of grass, and you're feeding it at a higher length. Anything that is over 4 inches would be considered fodder. Anything less than 4 inches would be considered sprouts. So let's look at some specific examples with our next slide. So this is from the Fresh Eggs Daily blog, and she's showing you two different methods here for that jar container system, where they do sell those commercial sprouting lids, which fit perfectly on those wide mouth mason jars, and they easily drain. It's like a wire mesh colander system there. If you can't find one of those or aren't interested in purchasing one, you can DIY your own lid using the shelf liner material. And so you can see that's just one of those padded shelf liners you can find anywhere, the dollar store, Walmart, pretty much any of your kind of home stores there. Making sure that it is a clean new material is going to be important, and that it has sufficient holes for drainage is going to be vital. Don't necessarily pull this out of the bottom of your mud closet cabinet and say, oh, this is great, and it's been sitting in there for years and it has deteriorated. Make sure that it is a new material, or is at least somewhat clean and usable. And we'll go ahead to the next slide. Okay, and so this is that jar method that the Fresh Eggs Daily blog shows, where you can see you're only using a tablespoon of seeds here. So this is where I say where that stacking is going to be okay, because there's plenty of room in that jar for air to get in between those seeds and allow the bacteria to be removed. And when you're rinsing it, the water can get in between all of those roots and sprouts to allow a really good fresh rinse, so no bacteria can take hold. It's just really important with this one to make sure that you are draining your jars really well. I recommend even storing them upside down, so either in your sink, or have some other kind of catch basin where that water can come out of that jar. So there's no water storage in that at all. All right, and then for the container method, this is generally what I prefer, because I just don't see putting in the effort for that jar method for such small amount of, unless you were going to have multiple jars going at one time for your flock. The container method is usually more substantial in the amount of sprouts that you can create using just materials that you have at home. So this was just a simple Tupperware container, just one of the rectangular ones. I drilled holes in this using, just a regular drill bit, and I would soak my seeds in this, and I would just put it in another equal size Tupperware container, fill that with water. So then I essentially had a colander and everything all in one in this one container. I never had to move my seeds, and it was super easy to rinse and utilize to grow my sprouts. And you can see there on the right hand side, those were the sprouts that I grew. I decided to leave them about 2 or 3 inches long when I fed them to my chickens, and that was a good way for them. In this method, the only kind of downside is it does create one cohesive mat, and so it's basically like feeding a block of sprouts to your chickens. You can't really, you have to break it up by hand if you wanted to kind of feed it in separate areas or whatnot. But super easy, super, out of sight, out of mind to put it on the window shelf and leave it there for 4 or 5 days and have that nice treat for my birds. Okay, and the next slide. So, one of the major challenges that we have to avoid with our sprouts is having too many seeds in the container, because that thick root mat that will quickly develop does not allow for proper drainage. So, even if you are rinsing this really well and you are um, putting it out, upside down or whatnot, if that root mat all entangles up and all those seeds and the roots and the sprouts are all mixed and commingled in there, then it doesn't allow for that water to escape and mold is likely to form. So you'll see usually like a pink kind of reddish slime mold start to form. You won't a lot of times see like green mold, which you're typically used to forming here, but definitely that pink slimy just gross mold in there is really easily and quickly forms, especially if you're leaving this in a warm spot. So make sure you're adding plenty of drainage in your container. You really can't have too much because you don't want any standing water. So the bigger the holes, as long as your seeds aren't going to fall through those holes, is going to be very important. And then store it in indirect light so it's not getting really hot, because moisture plus heat equals more mold growth. So, somewhere where it's not just getting full on sun is going to be ideal. So this could be a windowsill or a counter. Anything without direct light is perfect. And then you're going to want to feed this as a supplemental, not a large portion of the bird's diet. It doesn't have a whole lot of the nutrients that they're going to need, especially for our laying hens, when we're thinking of calcium and such. So making sure that this isn't the primary feed source for your birds is going to be an important part of avoiding any challenges with feeding sprouts. Okay, and so then once you get really excited about this and you figure out that it's kind of a cool thing to do for your birds, there are tons of different systems that you can utilize if you want. So you could expand your system so it's something that you have options available for them every day. So you'll see in these multi-level systems, they have fresh seeds that have really just come out of the soaking system, some that are just barely sprouting, and then all stages of the sprouting up until like ready to feed. This is normally what you would call a fodder system, except of course that this we're feeding this less than 4 inches. But there are multiple ways. You can see these people use Tupperware containers, seed trays, some type of like laundry basket material has worked before, aluminum pans, all kinds of ways there for you to um, grow your sprouts and have sprouts available every day rather than, once a week or so if you just only have one available system there for you to grow your sprouts in. And then that bottom right photo is kind of an interesting option that is popular for some of our backyard flocks. And this is uh, has many names. Some people call it a grazing cage or a grazing wire. And essentially, you build this raised bed system, and you'll see that there's actually hardware cloth over that raised bed. They plant the grass in there or seeds in there of whatever you're going to use. And instead of sprouting seeds in your home, they actually sprout them there in the coop. It allows them to sprout and grow up, and then your poultry have fresh forage to graze on all of the time, but they can't graze it completely down to the dirt. And so it allows that forage to come back and regrow. A lot of times they're not able to pull the seeds completely out, so you will have to refresh that with new seeds every now and then, but it does give you the option there to at least have some fresh forage available. And it's kind of like a sprouting system, but just a little different way to do it. And so, yeah, that's really, there's not much to talk about in the realm of sprouting grains. It is a very simple, easy process to do, and really takes no time at all for you to have that fresh forage available for your birds. This is really helpful for those birds that might not have the opportunity to free range, whether you have issues with predators or, um, like me, I have bird dogs in my own. House, so it's hard to have my birds out and about all of the time, but it allows them to, get that fresh green forage, which is really good for those nice, healthy egg yolks and really just the enjoyment of us and our birds. And I would be happy to take any questions if we have any, Jackie.
Yeah, anybody? I haven't seen any yet. I'm sure they were listening to you intently. Um, I learned a few new things, so that's always good. Um, Anybody have any questions? I guess I have one where you have them stacked one on top of the other. Um, when you're rinsing them, do you still drain them over like that, or you take them off and do them separately?
Usually when they're stacked like that, you allow the drainage to drain over them all completely, and it's kind of makes your system a little simpler because you just have to rinse the first stack and then the water just runs through the whole system. So you don't necessarily, as long as you have a proper system and you don't have super dense seeds in your container there, an issue with contamination or anything of that sort.
Right. And if they do get any mold or anything, they should discard, right? Not try to rinse off or um, anything like that.
Yes, absolutely. If you notice any mold growth, it is always best to discard those in the household trash or anything, especially, don't allow them, don't just throw them out to where our native bird species can get access to them.
Okay, somebody wanted to receive the list of seeds, so I put that back up. Anybody else have any questions?
I don't see the seeds to sprout if you did put it back up. I think you stopped
Oh,
sharing.
I got to share it
Great.
again. Right, right, right. Sorry about that. I will share it again. Share.
Yeah, you really can use any seeds. Most people will purchase, if you're just doing a small amount, it's economical to purchase things that are found in the grocery store, like those lentils, peas, any of the beans, and this is dry, seeds that are usually in the bags. If you buy something in cans or whatnot, it's not going to sprout. It's been treated of some sort. But you can also find a local feed store or seed store, um, and purchase those in bulk if you're looking to do a larger system like the wheat and rye, or any of your grass seeds as well.
So if they, buy a pumpkin for Halloween, they can take the seeds and either feed it to them directly or sprout them.
Absolutely, yeah. I typically never recommend feeding raw seeds to birds just because um, there are quite a few plant species that have toxic seeds, like we talked about the beans.
Right,
So there are a couple, like you can feed raw pumpkin seeds, but it's just always best to soak them or something of, mainly just because those seeds are so large and kind of coarse.
right.
But yeah,
I,
absolutely, they could utilize the some of the pumpkin seeds are hybrids, and so they may not sprout very well. And that's
yeah,
kind of a problem with any of our vegetables, um, that you would have in the grocery store, or fruits, is most of them are hybrids, and so sprouting is, not a high sprout rate, at least, that you'll get a
right.
high germination rate.
Yeah, I just, a lot of the natural dewormers often put pumpkin in it. So I don't know if it's pumpkin or pumpkin seed. So,
Yeah, pumpkin seeds are a common, I would say, like, old wives' tale as a natural dewormer.
yeah.
There are some studies, saying one way or the other, but
Yeah. Most of the natural ones that have pumpkin in it, they also have diatomaceous earth, so I
hmm
wouldn't recommend it. Um, Somebody want to know, can you feed plain sunflower seeds?
You can feed plain sunflower seeds. Bit expensive for your birds, so totally up to you. I would typically recommend finding the ones in like the bird seed aisle, or if you are interested in growing your own sunflowers, that's also an option as well. Just always make sure you're checking those for mold or anything, because those aflatoxins can be extremely dangerous to our birds. So
Right. So if you go to the grocery store and they have these cans of lentils, peas, and beans, can you use those?
not the cans. Typically those, because they've already been soaked for
Cooked,
so long or
right?
heated. Yes, ma'am. That they're not going to sprout.
So,
But the anything in the dried beans, so like in the bags that you'll find, uh,
right.
will typically be sproutable.
But you shouldn't feed the raw ones, right?
You should not feed raw legumes. No,
No, so,
absolutely not.
so you should sprout them first,
So no, none of the beans, peas, or lentils should be fed raw.
right? Cool. Anybody have any more questions? I'll give you a few more minutes to think about it before we close it down. Our next webinar is on feeding alternative grains into a mixed feed. That's me. And then the month after that, it's alternative protein. So we're going to be going over some more feeding for a while. So hope you'll join us for those. This was recorded and will be posted um, on our YouTube channel, as well as on the Facebook, as well as the same place where you went on e-extension to register for it. And it will also be posted on our website with the poultry.extension.org. So there's lots of ways you can access it. So thank you all for coming. Thanks you, Alicia. That was a really good presentation. I enjoyed it, learned a lot. I've never tried sprouting, so it's always a good thing to learn something new.
Thank you. Thank you for bearing with our technical difficulties.
Difficulties, yeah. And I hope you're feeling better soon.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, bye-bye, everybody.